Tana Rabbanan. Now we know that one of the things that Anshe Yericho, the rabbinic leaders of Jericho, did that were under protest by the other sages was that they used to leave peah for leafy vegetables. And the Gemara had explained that leafy vegetables are not subject to the mitzvah of peah, because one of the criteria to be subject to the mitzvah of peah, leaving a corner of your field to the poor, is that it has to be nichnas l'kiyum, that you bring it in for long-term storage. Leafy vegetables do not have long shelf life, and therefore, because of that, they are precluded from the mitzvah of peah. This was in itself the machlokes. So Tanu Rabbanon, the Brisa now says Barishona, and we're going to see a couple of other Brises today that talks about Barishona, what was done originally, and how the policy changed afterwards. Hayunostin peah lelefes v'lakruv. They used to take the leaves, they used to subject the leaves, the leafy part of the turnip, and also they used to take cabbage, and they used to leave peah for that. Now these are leafy vegetables. The turnip itself, as was clarified yesterday in the Gemara, everyone agrees is subject to peah because it's a stored commodity, it's a stored produce. But the leafy part of the turnip was the issue of where the people of Yericho departed from the other sages. So anyway, originally that's what they used to do. And Rabbi Yossi Omer Af lekaflot. Rabbi Yossi says even kaflot was also subjected to the law of peah. How do they translate kaflot in your Gemara?
Leeks.
Leeks. Okay. Also a type of somewhat leafy vegetable. V'tanya idach. Another brisa says hayunostin peah lelefes v'lakaflot, that they used to take peah for the leaf of the turnip and for the leek. And Reb Shimon Omer af lekruv, and Reb Shimon says even for the cabbage. Now it sounds like when you look at the at first glance, Nema Tlasi Tanoi Havu. It seems that there are three different opinions that are being represented by these two brises. You have the Tanakama of the first brisa, who says that originally only the turnip and the cabbage were subject to peah. You have the Tanakama of the second brisa, who says that only turnip and leek were subject to peah. And then you have Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon, who seem to be the third opinion. They seem to be in accord with each other, and they seem to be saying that all three, turnip, cabbage, and leek, are all subject to peah. So you have a three-way machlokes. The first opinion is there are only two that were subject to peah, turnip and cabbage. The other opinion is that the only two were turnip and leek. And the third opinion, which is Reb Shimon and Reb Yossi together, is all three, turnip, leek, and cabbage, are all subject to peah. But yeah.
Could you explain again? I think you went through, but why would some rabbis be objecting to a community having a chumrah about these?
Yes, very good question, Bob. Because it's a chumrah that leads to a kula. You see, if something's not subject to the law of peah, the problem with leaving it for the poor is that they're eating tevel. They're eating untithed produce. Peah in itself, if the law requires that you leave peah, that peah is not subject to tithing. So therefore the poor can take it and consume it with impunity. But if something is not subject to peah and I donate it as peah, I have to tithe it first. And this is what was being done, is that landowners were not tithing the peah, and they were leaving it for the poor. Okay? Very good point. Okay. So the Gemara says, are there three different distinct opinions? The Gemara says, lo, trei tanoi havu. There are really only two opinions that are being represented by these two brises, and we'll clarify. The Tanakama de Reb Shimon, hainu Reb Yossi, the Tanakama de Reb Yossi, hainu Reb Shimon, umay af akamaisa. And the way you read it is as follows. The Tanakama of the first brisa, the Tanakama de Reb Shimon, hainu Reb Yossi. That when you look at the Tanakama of the second brisa, that they would take peah for lefis and kaflot, that's really Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Because when Rabbi Yossi says on the first brisa, as a response to the Tanakama that they used to take peah for turnip and cabbage, and Rabbi Yossi says even for leek, he doesn't mean even for leek to add leek to the list of two to make it three. He doesn't mean to say that I agree that they would take peah from turnip and cabbage and I add leek to that list. No, he means to say that they used to only take peah from turnip and I add leek to the list for a total of 2. Meaning that when he says af, he says even, he means even adding to the first item on the Tanakama's list. I don't agree to the second item on his list. The Tanakama says that the 2 items that were subject to peah were turnip and cabbage. I don't hold of cabbage. I agree that turnip was on the list, but instead of cabbage, you should put on leek. And so therefore, Rabbi Yossi's opinion is exactly the same as the Tanakama of the second brisa, who says turnip and leek. And Reb Shimon is the same thing. And the Tanakama, the Rabbi Yossi, Hana Reb Shimon. And Reb Shimon says to the Tanakama of his brisa, which is that the list is turnip and leek, he says, no, I say even cabbage. He's not adding a third item to the list of 2. He's saying take out leek and put cabbage in instead. So therefore, he's exactly the same as the Tanakama of the first brisa. So it turns out that there are only 2 opinions. Everyone holds that there's a list of 2 leafy vegetable items that used to be subject to peah until the rabbis protested. According to the first opinion, which is Reb Shimon, who's the Tanakama of the first brisa, the 2 items on the list are turnip and cabbage. According to Reb Yossi, the 2 items on the list are turnip and leek. Those are the only 2 opinions. There's no one that holds at all 3. Okay, Tana Rabbana. Now let's go into the Agadata. Ben Bohayan nosan peah liyerek, uba aviv umitzan lanim shayu toan in yerek, ba'omdim al pesach hagina. That there was a man named Ben Bohayan. His father's name was Bohayan, and Ben Bohayan was in charge of the field. It sounds like either it was jointly owned by the father and son, it was a family garden, and Ben Bohayan, the son, left peah from some kind of leafy vegetable. Maybe it was cabbage. Hello, good to have you. Good to be back with you, Benny. So he left peah for the poor from this leafy vegetable, which we clarified is not really subject to peah. And his father, Mr. Bohayan, he finds the poor people are picking up the leaves, the leafy vegetables. They're carrying them and standing at the entrance to his garden. Amar lahem bonai hashlichu me'alechem. He said to them, my sons, my children, throw down the vegetables. Va'ani nosein lachem kiflayim b'me'user. And I promise to give you twice as much of that vegetable from the tithed portions. Lo mipnei she'eni tzara, ela mipnei she'amru chachamim einostim peah liyerek. And I want to assure you, it's not because I'm being stingy that I'm requesting of you that you drop the vegetables, but rather because our sages told us that this is not subject to peah, and as such, you're not permitted to consume it untithed. Now, lamalei lamemr lahu, lo mipnei she'eni tzara. Why did he have to add that caveat? I assure you that I'm not telling you to drop it because I'm being stingy. So that people shouldn't suspect him of just trying to trick them into dropping the vegetables so that he can get away without giving them anything. He needed to reassure them that he was going to give them, he was going to make them good on their tithe, that he wasn't going to let them go empty-handed. So he had to reassure them, this is not a ruse, this is not a trick. I'm not trying to trick you. I want to make sure that you don't eat tevel.
But he offered them double.
Yeah, but he had to explain.
But he had to explain to them, don't think that I'm offering you double as a trick. I'm offering you double, and I mean it sincerely, and you have to understand that the reason why I need you to drop this is because of halachic consideration. So he was demonstrating his piety. This was not just
and it was in their interest as well.
It was in their interest as well. He had to say that he was speaking as a religious Jew and not just as a landowner. Tana Rabbanan. Now you raise a good point, Alan, and that is that there are certain points in Jewish history where there's a certain certain characterization of the Jewish community and certainly leaders of the Jewish community in a negative light. And that's the entire discussion of today's Gemara, is that there was a certain lawlessness, a certain chaos, and a certain nefariousness among the leaders, especially the Kohanim in the times of towards the end of Bayis Sheni. And we're going to see that now, some certain stories that have to do with that. Tana Rabbanan Barishana Hayemenichin Oros Kodshin Belishkas Beis HaParva. Originally, the practice was that at the end of the day, when all of the karbanos had been brought, you'd be left with a bunch of animal hides. Who got to keep the animal hides? It was the Kohanim who worked on that day. Now, just to remind you of the terminology, the way that the Kohanim, the work distribution worked, is that there was a group of Kohanim that would get a week shift. And that week shift is called the Mishmar. They would work for that entire week. But during that entire week, the Kohanim broke up into 6 different groups for the 6 weekdays. And that shift within the shift was known as the Beis Av. It was basically your clan. And on Shabbos, everyone worked together. So originally what they did is that whatever day it was, if your individual daily shift, your Beis Av was on duty, the hides were divided among only the people of that Beis Av. And la'erev ha'yimachalken osod la'anshe Beis Av, and that evening they would divide it among the people of that daily shift. V'hayu balis ros notlu noso bizroa. And the problem was that there were people who were physically foreboding and intimidating, and they would confiscate. They took the lion's share of the hides, and the 98-pound weakling Kohanim were left with very little. Okay, so hiskinu shiyu machalkin osan me'erev Shabbos le'erev Shabbos ta'asyin kulu mishmaros v'shaklun ba'hadadi. So they decided, you know what we'll do instead? We'll accumulate all of the hides of the entire week, and right before Shabbos, when all of the members of the entire weekly shift, the Mishmar, come, then we'll divide up the hides. And that way, no matter how physically intimidating a guy is, he's not going to stand up to the entire weekly shift of Kohanim. The masses will be able to oppose some shtarker who's going to try and take more for himself. But then, instead of the physically intimidating people, you had the socially or class intimidation. You had the Kohanim, who were the leaders, the communal leaders of the community. They said, no, my beard is longer. I get to take a bigger amount of hides. So again, you see this social corruption that is permeating the Beis HaMikdash. So Amdu Ba'olim V'Yikdishum Lashem. So the Kohanim said, we've had enough of this. So what they decided to do is to avoid any problems. They decided in unison that they would just declare all of the hides to be hektish, and that way no Kohen could claim a greater portion than the other. And they made it hektish to the Bedek HaBayis, so the hides were donated to the treasury. The treasury could then sell the hides and accumulate huge assets for the Beis HaMikdash. So Amr lo hayu yomim mu'atim ad shechifu es ha'heichel kulo b'tavlo shel zav she'ein ama al ama ka'ovei dinar zahav. So it didn't take long after this practice started that there was so much of accumulation of assets in the Beis HaMikdash, the treasury, that they were able to purchase gold tiles for the floor of the heichal, of the covered portion of the temple. They would use as floor tiles. And it was so opulent, the gold tiles were 1 amma by 1 amma with the thickness of a dinar coin, which is significant. This is not gold foil. This is mamish like a gold tile. And then they would fold up the tiles. In other words, they would pick up the tiles off the floor, make a stack out of them, and place them in the entrance to the Har HaBayis, where all the Jews would come up to the Temple Mount and see. And they would say, look at the opulence of the temple, and take note of the fact that no Kohen is working here for personal gain. We've donated all of these proceeds to the temple, and therefore this would sort of demonstrate that the Kohanim were on the up and up. So Tana Abba Shol Omer Koro Shel Shikma Hayu B'Yericho V'Hayu Balis Ros Notlin Osan Bizroa. Another example of where there was this social corruption is that there were sycamore trees that were growing in Jericho, and they were owned by private landowners. This was on private property. But people who were ruffians and didn't care about ownership, they basically said, I'm bigger than you, and they went ahead and chopped down these trees, which were of great value. Amdu ba'alam v'ikdishim l'shamayim, and so the owners decided, you know what, These guys are starkers and they're physically intimidating and they don't have any concern about Geneva. But if we make them hektish, then they're from enough to know that if they violate hektish, they're in real problems with God. And so they made them hektish, and as a result, it prevented anyone from taking them. So Aleihem val kayotze bahem Amar Abashol ben Botnis Mishum Abi Yosef ben Chanin. So about such people, meaning about people who would take things by force and through intimidation, Abashol ben Botnis said in the name of Abi Yosef ben Chanin, these are famous Tanoim in the times of the Second Temple, Oili mi beis baitos, Oili me olasan. Woe is me from the house of Baitos. Baitos was one of the Kohanim Gedolim. He himself may not have been bad, but his entourage was pretty nasty. So he said, woe to me from the house of Baitos, woe to me from their curses. Or Rashi explains that the word Allah over here means their sticks, because they had strong arms, they had muscle, right? They had their thugs who would go around intimidating people. Oili mi beis Chanin, oili mi lichishasan. Woe is me from the house of Chanin, also a Kohen Gadol. And woe is me from their whispering, which Rashi means that they used to inform on people to the government. Oili mi beis Katros, oili mi kulmosa. Woe is me from the house of Katros, another Kohen Gadol, and woe is me from their quill. They used to write letters to the Roman authorities to get Jews in trouble. Oili mi beis Yishmael ben Piachi, oili me egrofan. Woe is me from the house of Yishmael ben Piachi, another Kohen Gadol, and woe is me from their fists. They were strong arms. They were muscle. Shehem Kohanim Gedolim. So why? Because these men were Kohanim Gedolim. Uvneim Gizborim. Their sons were the treasurers. So they used to, intimidate and forcibly confiscate people's assets. V'chasoneim amarchalin, and their sons-in-law are amarchalin. And the word amarkal is from the word amar kol. Whatever he says, everything goes. Meaning that he has a lot of authority. And ve'avdehen chovten esa'am b'maklos, and their servants hit people with sticks. Meaning that they hire a peasant muscle to intimidate and beat up people. Tanu Rabbanan, Arbat Tzavachos Tzavcha Azara. There were 4 cries that the courtyard of the temple cried out, meaning that there were 4 things that it cried out, either in pain. We're obviously personifying the temple by saying that the temple is either in pain and is crying out, saying, get away from me, or it's saying, welcome. So Rishona Tzu'u Mikan B'nei Eli Shetimu Heichal Hashem. The first cry was even actually before the Beis HaMikdash. This is in Mishkan Shiloh, before David HaMelech, in the times of Shmuel HaNavi, where the temple courtyard says, depart from here, sons of Eli, that you have defiled the house of God, because as the Navi says, that they used to sin with women who would come for karbanos. The other cry is that it said, depart from here, Yisachar, Ish Kfar Bar Koi. He was one of the Kohen, he was a Kohen Gadol in the second temple. He would honor himself and defile the karbanos. Why? He used to wear silk over his hands so that he wouldn't make himself dirty from the blood of the karbanos, and Rashi says there were 2 problems. Number 1, technically there's not allowed to be a chatzitza, a separation between your hand and the karban. But number 2, from just from the optics of it, it makes it look like the karbanos are miyasdik, and that's something that's terrible to give off that impression that you don't want to be in contact with the karban. Right, right. So that was the second cry of the temple court. By the way, there are some people who derive from this story that a moil should not wear gloves when he does a bris. But of course, there are others who disagree with that because they say it's a very poor analogy. Here, there was no concern for hygiene and for sanitation and protection from infectious diseases, both from the moil to the child and from the infant's blood to the moil. But when you're doing it, not because the mitzvah is miyas to you, is disgusting to you, but rather because for medical protection, so then it's a totally different story. Okay. Va'od savcha ha'azara, another cry that the courtyard made here was a positive cry. Su'u sha'arim rasheichem v'yikanes Yishmael ben Piachi talmido shel Pinchas. Open up the gates and let Yishmael ben Piachi enter, who was the student of Pinchas. It's not clear whether he was literally a student of Pinchas or whether this is a reference to the original Pinchas, who was a pious Kohen Gadol. V'yishamish b'kahuna gedola, and let him serve as the Kohen Gadol. And like Rashi says, even though we mentioned before that his family was, he had rough guys and he had muscle in his family, he had muscle and fists in his family, in his entourage. Nevertheless, he himself was a righteous man. Va'od savcha hazar esu sharim rasheichem yikanis Yochanan ben Narboy talmido shel Pankoi. The other positive cry was again, lift up your gates, O temple, and so that Yochanan ben Narboy, the student of Pankoi, shall come in. And why? Why was he so? Why is he considered praiseworthy? Because v'yamali kreiso mikadshe shamayim, and let him fill his belly from the sacrifices. In other words, he had a voracious appetite, and he was able, as the Kohen, together with his family, to consume all the korbanos. Amru alav al Yochanan ben Narboy shahya ochel gimel beos agolim. They said about him that he was able to eat 300 calves. V'shosa gimel meos gar ve'yain. He used to be able to drink 300 flasks of the wine libations. Va'ochel arboim sa gozolos b'kinuach suda. And for dessert, he would eat 40 measures of doves or of chicks, of birds. And Rashi explained he didn't eat this himself personally. It's that he had a large family, he had a lot of Kohanim sons, maybe grandsons, and sons-in-law. And so when they sat down to eat, it was a big suda, and they were able to consume all of the sacrificial meat. Amru kol yamav shel Yochanan ben Narboy lo nimtza nosar b'mikdash. And during his lifetime, there was never nosar, never any left. Like your mother says, clean your plate. In the Beis HaMikdash, they want you to clean your plate because there's an aveira of nosar. So he was a good boy. He listened to his tata, his father in heaven, and he ate all of the meat that he was supposed to eat, and that was considered to be a mitzvah. He did it l'shem shamayim, and that's why he was considered, not that he was a glutton, but rather because he knew that it was important not to have any nosar.
Rabbi, a son-in-law can eat from...
if he's a Kohen, he's got to be a Kohen.
No, but so a son-in-law who's not a Kohen, but
he can't partake in kachim. No, truma. You're thinking of truma, maybe. But even that, the son-in-law is not allowed to partake in. There's certain family members that are allowed to partake in truma, even though they themselves are not kohanim, but kachim not. My salka baby Yisachar ish kfar bar koi. So the Gemara's question is, and what was the final fate of this man who wore the silk gloves? Yisachar ish bar koi. What was how was he punished by Hashem? Amri Malko Malkas Abu Yasfi. So the Gemara says that there's the following story. It's not clear who this king and queen were. I would suggest that maybe it was Yanai and his wife, who were known to be cruel to the sages and other leaders of the Jewish community. So, because this is the end of the Second Temple era, where there's a lot of social corruption, and so the king and queen were once sitting and having the following discussion: Malka Amar Gaja Yoy, Malka Sa Amar Imra Yoy. And the king said a goat is the better animal, and the queen said a sheep is a better animal. And they were debating. It's not clear why they were debating this particular issue. And maybe they were bored one day, and the king was admiring goats, and the queen said, "But sheep are such much nicer animals." And the king said, "What are you talking about? I'd rather have a goat any day over a sheep." So Amru Man Muchach Kohen Gadol de Kamasi Karbanos Kol Yoma. So they said, "You know what? Who can settle the argument? Let's call the Kohen Gadol. He's constantly working with animals in the temple. He'll tell us which is a better animal." So Asa Ihu and Achve Biyade, Igaja Yoy, Yasek Litamida. So this Kohen Gadol Yisachar was an arrogant man. And when he heard the question, they told him, the king said, "I say that the goat is a better animal," and the queen said, I say a sheep is a better animal. And he motions with his hand like this. He says, like a person who's dismissive, and waves his hand in dismissal of, like it's a stupid question. And so in a condescending way, he says, obviously the sheep is a better animal, because if the goat was a better animal, then you would offer the goat on a much more frequent basis than the sheep. The goat would be brought as the korban tamid. But what is the daily sacrifice? It's the sheep. It's not the goat. So clearly the sheep is a better animal. So Omar Malka Ho v'lo havi le'emsa d'malchus nifsaku liyamine. So the king said he was so upset at the way that this fellow was so condescending and so dismissive of the king's position. He says, since this fellow has no respect for the monarchy, cut off his hand that waved in this way, that was dismissive. Cut off his right hand. So Yav Shochad upaske lismole. So he was able to bribe the executioner who had the axe and convinced him to cut off his left hand instead of his right hand. So Shama Malko upaske liyamine. The king heard about it and said, okay, cut off his right hand now. So he ended up with no hand. So this is, the Gemara says, this was his compensation for wearing the gloves. Amar Rav Yosef, Berich Rachmana de Ashkele Liyisacher Ishkvar Barkoi Lemitrapse Minei Bahai Alma. So Rav Yosef says a bit of a startling statement, but he says you got to think about it. He says, "Blessed is the merciful one who meted out justice against Yisachar Ishkvar Barkoi in this world." In other words, he said he wasn't such a bad guy, and so Hashem punished him in this world to keep his reward intact for the next world. Amar Ravashi Yisachar Ishkar Bar Kfar Barkoi Lotana Masnisin. Unfortunately, Yisachar Ishkvar Barkoi didn't learn Mishnah. If he would have learned Mishnah, he would have known that he was wrong to say that one animal is any better than another. Ditnan Rushimon Oimer Kivasim Kodmim Leizim B'chol Mako. That even though normally in the Torah, when the Torah gives you a list of options of which behemoth to bring, normally it says the sheep, normally lists the sheep before the goat. But Yachol Mipnei Shemutcharon B'minam, you might think it's because the sheep is a preferable animal over the goat, it's a better animal than the goat. Tamulomar Im Keves Yavi Karbano. But there's one place in the Torah, in Vayikra Perek Daled, where the goat is mentioned first, and then it mentions the sheep. So that's to show you that there is no preference of one over the other. And Malamesh Shtem Shkulin Ke'echad. This teaches you, says the Mishnah, that they're both equally desirable to Hashem. It's not that one is better than the other. Ravina Amar Afilu Mikranami Lo Kari. Yochanan Yisachar Ish Barkoi didn't even learn the Chumash itself. The Chumash itself is clear because the Chsiv Im Keves Im Eis, Iboy Keves Laise, Iboy Eis Laise. Because the Torah says Im Keves, Im Eis. If you want to bring the sheep, bring the sheep. If you want to bring the goat, bring the goat. The language of Im If implies that it's completely up to you. There is no preference or weight placed on one animal over the other. The question then becomes, so then why is it that the sheep is offered with much more prominence and frequency than the goat? The answer is that you can't gauge something's importance by its prominence and frequency, because everything has a place in Hashem's world, whether it's more frequent or more prominent than the other. And I think that perhaps this is an underlying current in this entire discussion, is that part of the downfall of the Second Temple was the social stratification and the social corruption that ensued as a result of people thinking that they were better or superior. And as a result, this is where you got these strong-arm guys, these starkers, these communal leaders who said, I'm entitled to more. And what the Gemara is trying to subtly demonstrate to us is that you might think that the sheep is better than the goat. The goats, what is it? They got your goat? What's something got your goat? No, the goat is just as important of an animal as the sheep. Just because the sheep is brought with more prominence than the goat doesn't make it any more important or any more desirable to Hashem. And that's sort of the social commentary that we have to learn not to repeat that mistake that was done in Bayesheni. So now you look at the last line and it says, Hadron Allah makom shenahagu uslik Allah pesach rishon, which is a very strange thing. It seems like almost we're at the end of the Maseches when we've really only finished the 4th chapter of Pesachim. So the Meforshim explain, they speak out that there's a split here. We're starting now, tomorrow we'll start the 5th parak of Pesachim, which deals now with all the laws of Korban Pesach. From the 5th parak through the 9th parak, the next 4 parakim are going to deal with the laws of Korban Pesach. Up until now we've been dealing with laws that are universal to the holiday of Passover, regardless of whether there's a Beis HaMikdash or not. And from this point onwards, we're dealing with the halachas that are unique only to the times of the Beis HaMikdash, which was not extant during the times of the composition of the Mishnah and the Gemara. So that perhaps is one reason why there's a division point, that there's a very strong dividing line at this point. It'll only be at the 10th parak, which is the last parak of Psachim, that we go back to the laws of the Seder, and we go back to the universality of the celebration of Pesach. And that's why you have this long annotation here, Seder v'Hilchas Korban Pesach Rishon b'Kitzara, an exposition on the laws of the Korban Pesach, because basically it goes through all of the halachas of how to bring the Korban Pesach. That needs to be studied simply because it's not something that we can look and observe and see how people are doing it. We have to learn from the Mishnayos and the Gemaras.
Who compiled this?
That's a good question. I don't know who wrote it. Who wrote this? Who wrote this? It was probably someone relatively recent. I don't know who the author is, but someone told me they have this same text in some of the Haggadahs as well, in the Machzor as well.
I also was thinking who wrote.
Yeah, it could be that you could find the authorship on the Sharblat of the Gemara. You'd have to take a look, but I don't know offhand who wrote it.